At the Healing Arts School, Wayne, Ford, and Harley Shepard were discussing the conflict between the Alliance and the Myriads. Harley assumed that if the Alliance and the Myriads were both inevitably weakened, it would be a positive thing. But Wayne expressed his worry that if the Myriads lost, there would be nothing to hold the Alliance in check. Harley replied that even if the Alliance were successful, they would emerge so weakened that they would be completely vulnerable.
Do you think that old bastard from the Alliance would do something without preparing for every possible contingency? He would never leave the Alliance vulnerable enough for that. Wayne Ford replied as he stood up and walked to the window with his hands behind his back. He has endured for so many years. His attack will definitely be thunderous.
Wayne Ford raised his head and looked at the sky outside the window. He shook his head and said,
You can choose not to believe me, but you will see that when the Myriads are destroyed, it will not be long before the Pinnacle's army arrives on our shores again.
In the ancient tomb, Kevin and a few dozen others were standing at the entrance of the cave. Because of the time, people from other organizations had already started searching everywhere. The Morris family was known as one of the most powerful families in the country. Although they had fought various adversaries for many years, they didn't allow anyone to question their strength. Even when comparing the Union to them, they were like fireflies in the sun.
Mr. Morris, I know that your family has had a strained relationship with Kevin Williams. Today, as long as you hand him over.
Kevin immediately interrupted. Who said I have a strained relationship with the Morris family? Kevin was clearly unhappy. I have just become Mr. Morris's protege. From now on, I am his right-hand man.
What did you say?
Sebastian Young asked in disbelief.
Is this true? It is absolutely true. I have indeed accepted him. So I suggest that you have better give up on the idea of harming him. If you know what's good for you, you should leave immediately.
Jake Morris said as he glanced at them disdainfully and waved his hand impatiently. Both Sebastian Young and Renee Silver took a deep breath. Kevin, who had always been firm and unyielding, had actually learned to lower his head. When the two groups had met earlier, they quickly reached an agreement. They worked together to find Kevin and were intent on forcing him to hand over the pill formula. And then they planned to kill him in the ancient tomb without anyone knowing. In any case, this place was filled with danger. Even if the Healing Arts School knew about Kevin's death, it would be impossible to pin it on them. There were all sorts of ways Kevin could find death inside the tomb. Did you hear what my leader said? Kevin said as he acted like a loyal lackey. Hurry up and get the hell out of here. Don't force Mr. Morris to make a move. Sebastian Young could only look at him with a stunned expression on his face before turning around and retreating. Inside the ancient tomb, Kevin didn't have any knowledge of what was happening outside. He stayed close to Jake Morris's subordinate, Paul Allison, and walked side by side with him. There was very little light in the dark cave. The tunnel started to become wider and wider. From the bumpy road at the beginning, it gradually turned into a well-paved stone surface. There were many patterns carved into the ground. Suddenly, Kevin, who was in the middle of the tunnel, stopped and caught the attention of Paul.
What's wrong with you?
Paul glanced at Kevin and asked. My leg seems to have been caught by something. Help me take a look, Kevin said with a straight face. His tone didn't change at all. Paul stepped toward him and squatted down to take a look. Suddenly, Kevin grabbed Paul's shoulder and pulled him forward. The sudden move didn't give Paul time to react. He subconsciously put his hand on the floor to keep his balance. At that moment, Kevin decisively pulled back his leg and replaced it with Paul's hand.
What are you doing?
Paul demanded, his tone suddenly becoming cold. He was no fool. He could clearly feel that the brick that his palm made contact with caved in a bit. Obviously, it triggered a switch of some mechanism, so Paul did not dare to pull his hand back. It's nothing. I just need you to support me for a second. It's quite uncomfortable to keep my legs in the same position for a long time, Kevin said as he scratched the back of his head and laughed.
Don't tell me it's not uncomfortable for me to hold on like this.
Paul's anger instantly rose as he scolded him in a cold voice. Oh, come on. Let's not get angry. Kevin was relaxed and said calmly, "Anyway, you've already pressed the brick. What do you think we should do now?"
Think of a way to get rid of it. Fix it. Do something. Look around and see if there are any mechanisms to destroy it," Paul shouted. He was really angry.
"Okay, you just hold on for a while. I'll look around," Kevin said as he nodded. He turned around and walked deeper into the tunnel. He didn't know how long it was, but he couldn't see the end of it. Was Kevin really going to help Paul remove the mechanism from under his hand? Only time could tell. Suddenly, a strong wind blew across Kevin's back. This kind of wind made Kevin not dare to make too much noise. He stood on the spot alertly and kept looking around. Immediately after, Kevin's ears perked up and another force blew from behind him. Without thinking, Kevin ducked his head. With a clank, sparks flew and an iron spear more than 3 feet long hit the wall behind him and broke into 2 pieces before it fell to the ground. "Not good," Kevin said out loud as his eyes widened. The iron spear fell to the ground as if it had just pressed down on a mechanism. In an instant, there was a muffled sound coming from all directions, as if hundreds of excavators were driving through the tunnel. Several ear-piercing sounds rang out one after another. Kevin saw more than 10 spears flying toward him at the same time. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of the Radiants, Phoebe Anderson was sitting alone in the garden. She was holding her chin in both hands and her face was full of sadness. "Phoebe, why are you sitting here all alone? What are you thinking about?" Dalton's wife, Miranda Steele, said as she slowly walked over with a cup of tea in her hands. Ever since they came to the Radiants, the two of them had become like sisters. Usually they didn't need to ask for anything here. Their food, accommodations, and everything else they could think of were all taken care of. In fact, their lives were even a little boring with so little to do. "Can I tell you something, Miranda?" Phoebe asked as she looked up at her, then took a deep breath and said, "To tell you the truth, sometimes I just feel like I'm a burden. I can't help Kevin at all. I don't even know where or how he is now." Miranda could not help but smile when she heard that. "I was wondering why you look so listless today. So you miss Kevin." Phoebe seemed to get a little shy when she heard her say that. "Actually, you really shouldn't blame yourself too much. Let me tell you the truth. Although I don't know how to persuade you, I can tell you the truth. Whether it's Dalton or Kevin, these are not ordinary men. Their lives are complicated, and sometimes there's not much we can do to help them. All we can do is be there when they need us," Miranda said. But I really miss him," Phoebe said as she lowered her head even more. Miranda smiled and shook her head. There were some things that she did not need to say out loud. For example, she knew that wherever Kevin was, Phoebe was not the woman he was thinking about right now. She knew that he only had eyes for Lily. In Chicago's Salix Leaf complex, Emo Squire, Adriana Wright, and Gilbert Rhodes were called over by Rachel. This surprised Lily. These 3 plus Mitchell Cook were 4 of the most well-known people in all of Chicago. According to legend, they had a mysterious, powerful figure behind them, and half of the economy of Chicago was in their hands. "Miss Wright, Mr. Squire, Mr. Rhodes, thank you very much for coming," Lily began to say. But before Lily could finish, Emo Squire waved his hand gently. "Please, you don't have to be such an outsider. You are Kevin's wife. That makes us friends. We are naturally obligated to help you with whatever you might need." When he said this, Lily was so shocked that she blinked her eyes several times. She could not believe that what she had heard was true. Would Emo Squire really help her with anything just because of Kevin? Adriana Wright said, "We have all heard about it, but there is one thing I don't understand. Although the Williams family has a great deal of influence in New York City, they rarely make enemies in other places. May I ask, how did your mother get kidnapped by the Williams family?" Although she did not look down on Lily, she was also not as modest and polite as Emo Squire. It was clear that she would not place Lily in the same position as she. After all, they were very clear about how Lily's family had treated Kevin. "I don't know either. It was someone from the Williams family who said that they had captured my mother and ask Kevin to come to save her alone. Lily's expression darkened as she spoke weakly. In front of Emo Squire and the others, she really was not in a position to be tough. Hearing this, everyone's brows slightly wrinkled.
It seems like the Williams family still hasn't forgotten about some things,
Emo Squire said as he tapped the coffee table with his index finger. Gilbert Rhodes thought for a moment and then made a decision. He said,
Lily, I need to make it clear that this is not something we can handle. The best situation is to wait for Kevin to come back, but we are not standing idly by. It's just that the Williams family isn't an easy group of people to mess with, and so I advise you not to act rashly and do something foolish. But don't worry. From now on, we will keep an eye on the Williams family. I will inform you immediately if anything happens.
Even they thought they did not have the capacity to fight the Williams family head-on, so the best course of action was to stay put and wait for Kevin to come back. Meanwhile, the dark passageway in the ancient tomb became completely lit up. The ground was filled with broken pieces of stone. Kevin held the night dagger with one hand and stabbed it deeply into the ground. His chest was moving up and down violently. Large beads of sweat kept dripping down from his forehead. He had triggered the mechanism here earlier. In half an hour, all kinds of hidden weapons had flown toward him. If not for the support of a variety of pills he had taken, he would have been reduced to a pile of mud long ago. At that moment, many people ran toward him from not far away. The leader was Dalton Steele. Troy Evans and the others were close on his heels, and they all anxiously helped Kevin up. Jake Morris, who was walking behind them, narrowed his eyes. He looked at Kevin, who was somehow still alive, with a thoughtful look in his eyes. Just moments before, when they were coming this way, the group bumped into Paul Allison, whose body was stabbed by more than 10 long spears. At that time, everyone thought that Kevin was surely already dead. However, no one could jump to a conclusion without seeing his corpse.
Kevin, what the hell? Don't scare me like that, Dalton shouted.
He was so anxious that he almost lost his mind.
Mr. Williams, wake up, Jordan Black shouted. Don't panic, everyone. Mr. Williams is fine, Troy Evans said.
He was the only one who kept calm. He immediately checked Kevin's pulse.
Mr. Williams is just unconscious, but his vitals are perfectly fine. He just needs to rest for a while.
Dalton and the others could not help but feel relieved when they heard this.
Wow, look at how excited you guys are,
Jake Morris said mockingly.
I think you're deliberately looking for trouble today, aren't you?
Jordan Black's violent temper immediately flared up. In fact, when they found out about Paul Allison's death, they had an argument with Jake Morris and almost got into a fight with him. Tensions were running high between Kevin's true friends and those like Jake Morris, who did not have Kevin's best interests in mind. In the ancient tomb, Kevin had just managed to dodge all kinds of dangerous obstacles when Dalton Steele, Troy Evans, and the others came rushing toward him. After just encountering the corpse of Paul Allison, one of Jake Morris's subordinates, not far away, they had all been very worried that Kevin might also be dead. After expressing their relief, Jake Morris mocked them, at which point Jordan and Justin Black stood up to him and demanded to know if he was looking for a fight.
So what if I'm looking for trouble?
Jake Morris confidently replied.
I don't care about you anyway. Just let Kevin wake up and talk to me.
He crossed his arms in front of his chest and held his head up high. It was obvious that he didn't take Troy Evans and the others seriously. You, Justin Black started to say as he lunged toward him.
Justin!
Jordan Black rushed forward and held back his brother just in time. They both knew each other's tempers very well. Justin Black usually did not like to show off, and he always acted respectfully toward Kevin. However, deep in his bones, he hid an extremely hot temper. Currently, Jake Morris and the others obviously had the advantage in numbers. Jordan knew that he and his brothers and their peers were not familiar with the surrounding environment, so the best course of action was to wait for Kevin to wake up. "Sir, time waits for no man," a young member of the Morris family said in a low voice. "We can't waste too much time here in the ancient tomb. No one even knows what's going on outside. I think it's best to get what we came for and get out of here." Jake Morris rubbed his chin and thought long and hard about the situation. In the end, he still decided to listen to his subordinate's suggestion. "You guys, bring Kevin along, and let's continue down the mountain," Jake ordered coldly. "Hey, are you for real? Didn't you see that Mr. Williams is unconscious? You're still going to keep moving instead of letting him recover?" Justin Black couldn't hold his temper any longer and roared loudly at Jake. "How dare you! How dare you disrespect Jake Morris? I haven't liked you since the moment I laid eyes on you." A member of the Morris family took a step forward and decisively scolded him. "What a coincidence! I have also disliked you since the moment I saw your ugly face." Justin Black took out his weapon as he spoke.
"Justin, don't be rude."
Troy Evans scolded him coldly, then turned to Jake and said apologetically,
"Sorry, our brother has a bit of a hot temper. Please forgive us if we have offended you in any way."
He added,
"It's not a good idea to stay here for too long. We will follow your orders and continue onward."
Jake Morris squinted his eyes and looked at Troy Evans for a few seconds. Then he looked at the others and then finally looked at Kevin. Of course, he could see that although the few people in front of him were young, their power bases were actually quite high. Jake really couldn't figure out where Kevin had found these people, even though his own men had fairly high power bases themselves. After thinking carefully for a while, Jake Morris slowly said, "I guess some of you have some sense, but don't blame me for not assuming that was the case at the outset. I'll lead the way. You guys just take good care of Kevin." After saying that, Jake Morris led his men deeper into the tunnel. Justin Black put away his sword with disdain and spat on the ground. He said with a cold face, "If this was Apex Island, I would have twisted his head off and kicked it like a soccer ball."
"All right, let's dial it back."
Troy Evans rubbed his forehead and said helplessly,
"We aren't on Apex Island anymore. Since Mr. Williams wanted to show him some respect, it must mean that he is not someone to be trifled with. Even if it's only for Mr. Williams' sake, we can't let any complications arise."
In fact, he also felt extremely aggrieved in his heart, but he had decided to swallow his pride for now.
"Actually, you were right to stop him just now. If you didn't do that, I would have stopped you."
Dalton carried Kevin on his back and gave Troy Evans a praising look.
"None of you know that man. No one who knows him would dare to offend him or his family. So fighting them head on is like digging your own grave."
"What?" Troy said as his and the others' eyes almost popped out of their sockets. It was really a pity that they had been so isolated on Apex Island all their lives. They simply didn't see anything special about Jake Morris. Why was he, of all people, considered to be so powerful? Dalton didn't say anything more to Troy. Since Kevin wanted to temporarily cooperate with Jake Morris and the others, he would continue to follow his lead whether he was conscious or not. Maybe it was because there weren't any traps in the tunnel, or maybe it was because Jake Morris and the others were just lucky. But the road ahead for the next several minutes was smooth, without any obstacles. Soon, they arrived in a cavernous space. This seemed to be the end of the tunnel. There was no other entrance besides the place where they had first come into the tomb. In the middle of the opening, a tall platform was built with rocks. It looked like it had been there for a long time, and there was a small box on the platform.
"It seems that this is something of great value that was placed here,"
Jake Morris said with a proud smile on his face.
"Two of you, go and get it for me. I want to see what I've found."
"Yes, sir." As soon as Jake finished speaking, two of his subordinates quickly shot up. Just as they were about to reach it, a blue light suddenly shot out, lighting up the entire space. Immediately, the two members of the Morris family were thrown backward. They didn't even have the time to make a sound. The sudden turn of events made the smile on Jake Morris's face freeze. He suddenly turned his head and looked at Dalton and the others.
"You,"
he said. "What do you mean, you? What did we do?" Justin Black seemed to want to argue with Jake right away. He answered coldly, "We didn't even move a finger. We just stood here. Are you really going to try to blame us for this?" Troy and the others frowned when Justin said this.
"There's no one else here. Who else could it be but you? Are you suggesting that someone else is responsible for this?"
Jake shouted back. He was really angry. Those who dared to attack his people in front of him were obviously few and far between. After all, he was the young heir of the powerful Morris family. Today, he had already felt as if he had been repeatedly offended by Kevin's men. This was intolerable. Suddenly, a strange low voice suddenly sounded.
"Jake Morris, I never thought that you would be so short-sighted. Can't you even see the trap my people have set here?"
Everyone looked around vigilantly. They saw 5 or 6 young men slowly walking over from the entrance of the tunnel. Each of them was wearing bright clothes. Anyone with discerning eyes could tell that they weren't ordinary people. When these people appeared, Dalton's and Troy's faces instantly turned sour. They were all at least level 5 warriors, but they had never sensed anyone hiding behind them. They had even been able to injure 2 people just now without even being detected until they emerged.
"Greg Fantilli?"
Jake Morris immediately recognized the leader of the group.
Well, 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 Jake Morris. I won't waste my breath talking to you. To be honest, I'm here today only for that box over there. If you're still interested in living to see another day, I suggest you leave it to me and get out of here."
Greg Fantilli said very casually, as if he didn't have any respect or fear for the Morris family at all. The other 4 men beside him also looked very relaxed, without any signs of worry.
"Greg Fantilli, how dare you talk to me like that?"
Jake replied as he clenched his fists tightly.
"Huh, why wouldn't I dare? Although you can stand and talk to me now, I don't think it will take long to take you down. Besides, it won't be long before you're taken down by your own father's illegitimate child. I don't need to tell you that, do I?"
Greg said as he clicked his tongue a few times. His face was full of ridicule. These words landed like a boulder, and Jake Morris had no rebuttal. He was so angry that he could only clench his fists, but he still didn't dare to do anything. What the hell? Who is this guy? He actually dares to speak to Jake Morris like that? Kevin, who was lying over Dalton Steele's shoulder, frowned as he heard the way Greg Fantilli talked to Jake Morris. Troy Evans and the others looked at Kevin happily when they heard him speak.
"Kevin, you..." Dalton started to say.
"Lower your voice." Before Dalton could finish his sentence, Kevin whispered harshly. His lips barely moved as he said, "I woke up a long time ago. I was just putting on an act for Jake." It was true that Kevin had not suffered any real injuries. Everything was just an illusion that he had created. It was all for the sake of putting them in a position to escape in one piece. Still, he had never thought that Troy and Dalton would be able to stay so calm. Therefore, Kevin could only continue acting.
"Kevin, do you want us to run?"
Dalton asked in a low voice. Initially, he had only followed Jake Morris because he wanted to find an opportunity to slip away. Now that Kevin had woken up, the chances of doing so were even higher. "Let's not do anything just yet. I have a feeling that we're about to witness quite a show," Kevin said softly while staring at Greg Fantilli and the others.
"Greg Fantilli, if you have the guts, tell me what you just said."
Jake Morris's face had turned red.
"Why are you so angry?"
Greg replied casually as he raised his left hand and pointed at Jake with his index finger.
"Look at you now. If it wasn't for Calvin Morris, you would have been completely crushed already in the battle against the Pinnacle. I didn't expect someone like you to come to a place like this." "You forced me to do this,"
Jake said as a cruel smile suddenly appeared on his face. He added,
You have gone too far and humiliated me repeatedly. If you never leave this place, even your own family can't blame me."
"If you really think you have the ability to follow through on such a threat, just come on over and try," Greg shouted. He wasn't afraid of Jake Morris in the least.
"Everyone listen up. Kill this man and all of his people immediately,"
Jake Morris roared as he decisively pulled a sword out from behind his back. It had a blood-red blade. Kevin patted Dalton's shoulder, signaling him to put him down. His eyes were fixed on Jake Morris's sword. He had never seen anyone who used a sword like it before.
"The Blood Cry Saber? Looks like your family really cares about you to give you such a cherished weapon,"
Greg said as the smile on his face finally faded a little. He looked at the blade in Jake Morris's hand. His eyes couldn't help but show some seriousness. Jake's tone became even colder. He said,
"Greg, the two of us never had any bad blood with each other. Even if there was any conflict before, it could only be considered minor. But today, you have been too arrogant. I sincerely hope you learn a lesson from this that you can apply in your next life."
When he twisted his wrist, the aura emanating from his body suddenly became violent. "Huh, I didn't expect this kid to be that strong," Justin Black said in a surprised tone.
"He's a bit flashy, but not that powerful," Troy said as he frowned slightly, then narrowed his eyes and added in a serious tone, "Look at the sword in his hands."
While the few of them were talking, Jake Morris had already started to attack with the support of his men. The dozen men behind him all rushed forward with him without hesitation. On the other hand, the 5 men on Greg Fantilli's side were also alert and quickly reacted. They pulled out their weapons one after another and didn't show any signs of retreating. Instead, they also rushed forward at the first possible moment. However, Kevin clearly noticed that the movements of these 5 men were completely in sync. There was clearly a very close connection between them.
"The Fantilli family's 5 elemental technique."
Jake Morris could see the movements of Greg Fantilli and the others with a glance. He let out a cold snort.
"It will be more than enough to deal with you,"
Greg replied with a cold smile. He stabbed the long spear in his hand into the ground. He wasn't the only one. The others behind him also did the same thing at the exact same moment. Suddenly, the air in the cave began to circulate rapidly. A complicated pattern appeared on the heads and feet of Jake Morris and the others. "It's a trap," Kevin said, finally understanding the movements of the Fantilli family.
"What kind of trap can contain a dozen warriors like them?"
Dalton's eyes widened as he spoke with a face full of disbelief. By the time he realized what kind of trick Greg had unleashed, it would be too late. After Kevin revealed to Dalton, Troy, and the others that he had actually been awake and alert all this time, Greg Fantilli confronted Jake Morris, at which point Jake pulled out a blood-red sword. The smile on Greg Fantilli's face faded ever so slightly when he saw the Blood Cry Saber, and Jake Morris and his men immediately attacked. Suddenly, Greg Fantilli and all 5 of his men stabbed the ground with their weapons, and a complicated reflective pattern appeared on the bodies of Jake Morris and his men. In the next second, Greg Fantilli said loudly,
"Initiate the 5 elemental effect."
As his voice fell, a bright golden red light suddenly lit up, causing everyone present in the cave to squint their eyes at the same time.
"Today, you're going to see me break this effect,"
Jake Morris said as he took a deep breath. Dense spiritual energy continuously poured into the Blood Cry Saber in his hands, causing the red light that it was emitting to become brighter and more powerful every second. Suddenly, Jake Morris moved very slowly. He held the weapon with both hands and raised it high above his head. A biting cold energy burst out from the blade. It was as if the force the sword emitted was going to split the mountain open from the inside and disrupt the cage-like effect that Greg Fantilli had set up. In an instant, the air in the cave became incomparably hot, and several men let out blood-curdling screeches. The space seemed to have become unstable. The entire mountain began to shake violently, like an earthquake was rumbling underneath their feet. The warriors had trouble staying upright as the ground shook and rattled.
How could that sword be so powerful? This is unlike anything I've ever seen.
Troy Evans muttered under his breath as his pupils suddenly contracted. He stared at the scene in front of him in astonishment. After the strike, Jake Morris's face turned pale. Kevin clearly noticed that his right hand, which was bearing the brunt of holding the sword, had started to tremble ever so slightly. However, Greg Fantilli's condition was certainly not any better. Right in front of him, intense sparks were created where the energy emitted by the sword collided with the barrier of the cage effect. The 5 of them were clearly struggling and using all of their energy to fight off the sword's deadly powers. At that moment, the members of the Morris family weren't idle either. Their bodies were pushed to the limit, and the light bouncing off the walls of the cave looked like a magnificent fireworks show. More than 10 of them took turns to attack, but when their powerful skills collided with the barrier, they only caused minor disturbances that looked like the ripples in a pool of water. Greg Fantilli and the others started to move more quickly. With Jake Morris and the others in the center, their speed was so fast that they could barely even see them.
5 elemental effect. Stabilize.
The 5 of them shouted at the same time, causing the trembling barrier to stabilize once again. It seemed as if they were all communicating with each other to strengthen the barrier surrounding Jake Morris and the others.
It looks like they're all going to fight a battle of attrition.
Dalton suddenly nudged Kevin's shoulder and said as he sensed that this would be a battle to the death. "Isn't this just perfect?" Kevin replied as his face showed a strange smile while he stared at the box on the ground. "Troy, find an opportunity to quietly move forward and get that thing for me. The rest of you, follow me to help," he added. Jordan Black, Justin Black, and the others immediately understood what Kevin really wanted them to do. He wanted them to go up and disturb Jake Morris and the others' focus so that Dalton could have a chance. "Mr. Morris, don't panic. I will step forward and help you now," Kevin roared with righteous indignation. He carried the night dagger and ran up quickly. Dalton and the others quickly followed him. Seeing them make a move, Greg Fantilli clearly panicked. He couldn't help but shout at Jake Morris,
"I never thought that the Morris family would be so useless now. You are bullying the weak with your numbers, but you still don't know shame. You actually want to attack us from the front and the back."
Jake Morris's face turned red, but this was definitely not an ordinary battle. He immediately replied shamelessly,
"How can I be so shameless? Kevin works for me now, so it's only natural that he wants to help. It's just that you didn't plan to have to deal with him too."
After saying that, Jake Morris looked at Kevin with a complicated expression. He thought to himself,
"This is perfect. Why didn't I see that Kevin was so loyal in the past? But I will remember what he did. When I get out of this mess, I will make sure he knows it."
However, Kevin didn't know what he was thinking. The barrier of the 5 elemental effect could not only control the enemy, but was also capable of protecting the caster of the effect from others who would be behind its barrier. Therefore, if Kevin wanted to bring Dalton and the others into the cage-like formation, he had to break through the barrier from the outside first. "What the hell? What kind of turtle shell is this?" Kevin shouted as he waved the night dagger with all of his strength, creating sparks in the air. Seeing that Kevin did not use any of his spiritual energy, Jake Morris shouted in confusion,
"What the hell are you doing? You might as well dance over there. What's wrong with you? Hurry up and break the barrier."
Jake still didn't have any doubts about Kevin's loyalty to him. Mr. Morris, I'm afraid I used too much energy earlier. I haven't recovered yet, so all I can do right now is try to break through with ordinary weapons." Kevin scratched the back of his head and replied awkwardly. His words looked as though they were almost going to choke Jake Morris to death, but he could not refute what he had said. Everyone had seen what Kevin had done, so they all knew that he must be telling the truth. Jake Morris could not possibly ask someone to recover all of their energy in such a short amount of time. Hearing this, Greg Fantilli felt relieved and laughed loudly.
Jake Morris, I think you found such an impressive right-hand man. So it's just a little brother. Today, I think it's clear that no one can save you."
No one noticed that Dalton Steele, who was holding the two fusion hammers, looked like he was swinging the hammers nonstop. He was smashing the barrier with all of his strength. Troy Evans was following closely behind him, carefully preparing to make a move at any time. Kevin, who was secretly watching the two of them move forward, suddenly hit the barrier with the night dagger with all of his strength. In the next second, he flew backward and rolled on the ground a few times, looking very awkward.
Jake Morris, this is your loyal little sidekick? I must say, I expected better of you. I am not impressed,"
Greg Fantilli said as he laughed so hard that he almost lost his footing. Greg was thinking that it would be easy to beat Jake Morris when he had a group of followers with so little energy and skills to do battle. Jake was too embarrassed to retort. He slapped himself on the forehead. The rest of his men looked at Kevin as if they were looking at an idiot. "Sorry, Mr. Morris. I accidentally slipped just now," Kevin said as he stood up and patted the dust off his chest and legs, revealing the smile of a young boy who was desperately trying to impress his hero. Kevin rushed toward the barrier again with his dagger in hand, but he would be bounced away right away again. Still, he was stubborn like a child. He did not care how ridiculous his actions looked in the eyes of others. Apart from Dalton and the others, all of the other people present, those of the Morris family and Greg Fantilli's men, thought that Kevin's efforts were completely useless. He couldn't summon any spiritual energy, and so all he was able to do was use his own body. He seemed intent on using nothing but the sharpness of the dagger in his hand to cut open the barrier of the 5 elemental effect. Greg was feeling better and better. This battle would be easy to win. As this scene played out in front of Jake Morris's eyes, it touched the soft spot in his heart that no one knew about. He looked at Kevin with a complicated expression, not knowing what to say.
"Jake, you sure have found a loyal dog. Even in your current condition, he still wants to save you,"
Greg Fantilli said with a sneer, his eyes full of disdain, while inside he was laughing at Jake's followers' foolish attempt to break through the barrier of the 5 elemental effect with just a small weapon. It was simply a pipe dream. As Greg Fantilli and his men created a barrier surrounding Jake Morris and the other members of his family, Kevin rushed forward, ostensibly intent on helping Jake. Having exhausted so much of his energy already, Kevin could only haplessly strike at the extraordinarily strong 5 elemental effect encircling Jake Morris and the others, while Greg Fantilli laughed at his incompetence. As Kevin was thrown backward to the ground, Greg Fantilli mocked Jake Morris for having such a useless right-hand man like Kevin. Jake Morris, however, was not prepared to give in.
"Don't be so damn proud of yourself. Greg Fantilli, I don't believe that you would really dare to kill me here today. You know all too well the consequences that would bring,"
Jake said as he slowly placed the Blood Cry saber on the ground and took a deep breath. However, he still raised his head high and said, "I am the heir of the Morris family after all. If you dared to kill me, your own family would never let you go so easily. At most, I will make you pay with your life from the grave." Greg Fantilli's facial expression changed when he heard this. Although he didn't see Jake Morris as his equal, he spoke to Jake with disdain more as a battle tactic than because he truly thought of Jake as an inferior enemy. To be honest, Greg Fantilli didn't dare to take Jake Morris's life so easily. After all, looking down on someone like Jake Morris when he clearly had the upper hand and taking his life were two completely different concepts. Not everyone could easily get the better of the Morris family in any situation, not even Greg Fantilli, who also came from a very wealthy and powerful family in Washington, D.C. He was well aware that taking things too far today could have disastrous repercussions for him and everyone he knew. Still, he knew that only Jake Morris was here. If Calvin Morris was here too, Greg Fantilli really wouldn't dare to utter half the insults he had already let fly.
"Do you really think I won't dare to kill you?
Just because of your last name? Greg Fantilli asked, putting on a brave face despite the uneasiness in his heart.
Come at me if you really want to, then.
Jake Morris immediately replied, seemingly having seen through Greg Fantilli's fear. Jake even revealed a small smile on his face. While this exchange was going on, Kevin did not know how many times he had fallen to the ground. The clothes on his body had become dirty. Even his face was covered with a layer of mud. After the last time he fell, he decided it was useless to stand up again.
All right, everyone stop wasting time here,
Jake Morris shouted as he looked at Kevin, who was lying on the ground. He paused for a moment and continued.
There is no deep hatred between us. There is no need for us to end up like this. As long as you do not attack my people, and as long as you do not disturb me, I will definitely not interfere with whatever you want to do in the ancient tomb.
Greg Fantilli thought for a moment before he stopped. He looked at each of his men and then looked at Jake Morris with a complicated expression on his face. After hesitating for a moment, he said slowly,
Is what you said true? How do I know that I can trust you? Of course you don't know that you can trust me, but I have no reason to lie to you,
Jake Morris said before adding,
You know both our paths will be winding, and it is entirely possible that I will come to find trouble with you later in life. It may be months or it may be decades. You have already become the head of your family, and one day soon I will become the head of mine. So let us both stay out of each other's way for now, and we can both become more powerful here today.
Greg Fantilli didn't answer him immediately. Instead, he furrowed his brows and seemed to be deep in thought. Jake Morris did not let anyone take advantage of this moment to try to make a move. Instead, he gave Greg Fantilli some time to think. Jake Morris licked his lips and said,
In some ways, we are actually very much the same. There is no need to be hostile toward each other. Greg Fantilli, we should actually become allies, even friends. We should help each other accomplish what we want to do the most and just be careful not to step on each other's toes.
Become friends, Greg Fantilli said as he gave him a deep look.
Let's wait until you have a firm foothold in the Morris family. Then we can talk.
This sentence had a deeper meaning. He did not reject Jake Morris's words directly, or it could be said that he also wanted to position himself in alignment with whichever Morris brother eventually took the helm, be it Jake or Calvin. No one noticed that while using Dalton as a shield, Troy Evans had placed the box into his pack. After Greg Fantilli said this, he quickly released the barrier and disappeared with his men down a tunnel in a flash. From the moment he had arrived, he hadn't even taken a look at the box. Only then did Jake Morris let out a long breath of air. He lifted up the blood cry saber again and looked to his side, intending to check on Kevin's condition. However, before he could take a step forward, Dalton and the others had already arrived in front of Kevin. The five of them surrounded Kevin, blocking everyone's view of him from all directions. Among them, Kevin slightly opened his eyes and gave Dalton and Troy a praising smile. Perhaps because of Kevin's acting skills, Dalton, who had always been calm and collected, suddenly let out a strange cry.
Damn it! Kevin, are you okay? Give me a reaction. Let me know that you can hear me.
Following his performance, the rest of the people surrounding Kevin joined in. Mr. Williams, please, you're scaring us. Please say something, Violet Sweeney said. Justin Black added, If anything were to happen to you, what would we do? How are we going to explain this to your wife? All of a sudden, each of them spoke with deep emotions, which made Jake Morris and the others nervous. They didn't know what had happened to Kevin, but they really thought that it must be something bad for all of them to be reacting like this.
What happened to him?
Jake Morris said as he hurried over and pushed Dalton and Troy out of the way. He walked into the middle of the crowd and said,
Kevin, wake up! Please, wake up!
Jake grabbed Kevin's shoulders with both hands and shook his body with all his strength. He was clearly very nervous. In fact, one of the reasons why Jake Morris was motivated to reconcile with Greg Fantilli so quickly was because he saw that Kevin had fainted. No one could guess how touched Jake Morris was when he saw Kevin fall over again and again. Although Jake Morris was the young heir of the Morris family, he was born into a big and often distant family. He had never really experienced the warmth of human connection, let alone genuine care. The people around him either stayed close just because of his identity or simply wanted to have a relationship with the Morris family through him. Even the subordinates who followed him had never really shown a genuine appreciation for him as a person like Kevin had. He had been willing to do whatever it took to protect him. This made Jake Morris not only feel a sense of loyalty toward him, but even a true sense of friendship. Sometimes, wanting to move someone's heart was actually simple. Jake had always felt that everyone would be willing to abandon him if he woke up one day and his last name was no longer Morris. But Kevin seemed genuinely different.
"Kevin, wake up! Do you hear me?"
Jake almost screamed at the top of his lungs. Dalton and the others were shocked when they saw Jake Morris suddenly show so much concern for Kevin. What the hell was going on? At that moment, a member of the Morris family suddenly walked up beside Jake quickly. He looked especially flustered.
"He doesn't look good, sir. But what's more, the box we found earlier is missing. I think that one of the people with Greg Fantilli must have swiped it before they took off." "What did you say?"
Jake Morris said as he swung his head around and suddenly frowned. His eyes were filled with an indescribable seriousness. Although they did not have time to open the box, Jake could vaguely feel an extremely powerful energy emanating from it. It was as if all of the coldness in the cave came from the box, and he had to get it at any cost. After Jake Morris convinced Greg Fantilli that it was not worth fighting against each other, Greg Fantilli released the 5 elemental effect that was encircling them behind a powerful barrier. Jake then rushed to the unconscious Kevin's side to check on him. However, Dalton Steele, Troy Evans, and the others reached him first, and Kevin gave them a sly smile when he realized that his diversion had given them enough time to secretly grab the box, though Jake Morris thought that Greg had made off with the box.
"Damn it! How could they just take it away like that?"
Someone from the Morris family said angrily.
"Everything in the ancient tomb is ownerless. We were the ones who found that thing first, so it rightfully belongs to us now,"
another added. "Sir, you really must not forgive those people so easily for this. When we return to DC, we need to seek revenge on Greg Fantilli and his family and get that box back," a third person said. The experts of the Morris family standing off to the side were filled with righteous indignation. They seemed to be unable to swallow their resentment and wanted to immediately find Greg Fantilli and get their revenge. At that moment, Dalton and Troy suddenly looked at each other. Their hearts were beating rapidly. Fortunately, they had acted decisively during the discussion between Jake Morris and Greg Fantilli and had not been seen. They could only hope that they had not left any clues that they were the ones who had taken the box. More importantly, Kevin's acting was so realistic at that time that it seemed unlikely that anyone was paying any attention to the two of them.
"Damn it, Greg Fantilli. I will remember this. I will not let you get away with this the next time we meet,"
Jake Morris muttered under his breath as he clenched his fist tightly. In the mansion of the Thompson family in St. Louis, Joseph Thompson was sitting in his study. He couldn't help but suck in a long breath of air when he saw a video that had just been sent to him. Soon, Richard Swinton rushed in from outside with beads of sweat on his forehead.
"What happened?"
Richard Swinton asked as soon as he entered the room. He had known Joseph Thompson for many years, but this was the first time he had heard him sound like this. He hurriedly came straight over. Richard Swinton had been discussing his daughter Brenda with his wife Catherine at home. Suddenly, he received a call from Joseph Thompson, frantically asking him to come to meet him right away. He had made it clear that there was an urgent matter they needed to discuss. Joseph slightly raised his head and looked at Richard as he came into the room. Then he lowered his head slightly and pushed the tablet on the table toward him.
"This happened half an hour ago. Take a look for yourself," he said.
Richard Swinton's heart skipped a beat. He lowered his head to look at the screen. In the video, there were 5 or 6 black cars driving down the road. Suddenly, the leader and the last car exploded into flames. The people who were left behind quickly got out of the cars. Fortunately, it was nighttime, so there weren't too many other people around who could be hurt by the explosions. However, in the next second, the sound of gunshots filled the sky. Among the people who were looking for cover, Richard Swinton could clearly see Herman Thompson with his head full of white hair, and Kyle Thompson, who looked almost like a child, rushing closely behind him.
"Someone attacked Herman in D.C.?"
Richard Swinton immediately said, realizing the severity of the matter. His expression became extremely tense, and his face turned almost completely white.
"Isn't it clear in the video? Do you still need me to explain it to you?"
Joseph snapped, clearly in a bad mood. He crossed his hands on the table.
"How are Herman and Kyle doing now?"
Richard asked quickly, not paying any attention to Joseph's tone and attitude. Instead, he merely expressed his genuine concern.
"The latest news is that my father and Kyle have arrived at a safe house. 2 of my father's old friends sent people to rescue them,"
Joseph replied faintly, but the manner he was showing was completely different from his usual sense of calm.
"So what are you going to do next?"
Richard finally recovered his composure and asked thoughtfully. Joseph took a deep breath and said,
"Before my father left, he told me again and again that no matter what happened to him and Kyle in D.C., I must stay here in the Midwest to stabilize the Thompson family."
Listening to Joseph's narration, Richard began to analyze the situation in his heart. What Herman had said was not wrong. Thinking back to the time when the Thompson family had originally left Washington, D.C. and relocated to the Midwest, and now with the prestige of Herman Thompson and his son, they had established a firm foothold throughout the entire region and gradually developed their family business into what it was today. Now that Herman had once again entered the capital for the sake of Kevin, the danger they would face was obvious. The pool in D.C. was too deep, and there was no one there that could not be easily pushed around. Originally, the ones who wanted to deal with Kevin were the Herbalist Society and the Morris family, 2 major powers with extraordinary status. Even though Herman Thompson still had some influence in D.C. and had many old friends there, how many people would actually dare to interfere in this matter? If Joseph went to Washington now, wouldn't the Thompson family have no one left to control the broad organization in the Midwest? If someone took the opportunity to make trouble for them while he was gone, it would be like pulling up a tree from the roots. Surely that could spell imminent danger for the Thompson family.
"But my father is in a very difficult situation right now. His life is hanging in the balance. Who knows if he's hurt or if he's still in danger? How can I continue to just sit back and watch it happen from afar?"
Joseph said in distress as he pounded the table several times.
"As a son, it is my responsibility to make sure he's safe. I can't just watch my father die." "But what can you do?" Richard Swinton said. "Don't tell me you want to bring everyone from the Thompson family to D.C. and risk leaving things here exposed."
His words hit the nail on the head.
Richard added, "You should know very well that even if you do that, can you really fight them to the death? The worst is also the most likely outcome. Even if the fish dies, the net won't break."
Hearing this, Joseph didn't continue speaking. He just silently looked at the watch on his wrist, not knowing what to say. Richard Swinton sat down in the chair across from him and didn't say anything. He also fell into deep thought.
"There is actually another way,"
Joseph, who had been silent for a long time, said suddenly. Richard was stunned for a moment, then quickly reacted. He looked at Joseph and said in surprise,
"You don't want the Radiants to attack, do you?"
"That's exactly what I want," Joseph replied, nodding without hesitation. "Although my father was rescued by a few of his old friends, I have received accurate news. At that time, it was the Radiants who fought with their lives on the line to buy some time. They even killed many of their enemies. From this, I can see that there are many experts in the Radiance who would be willing to do anything for my father. I want to ask them to send some experts to Washington, D.C. and protect my father. I don't care how much the Thompson family has to pay. You can't put a price on my father's safety." This time it was Richard who didn't say anything. He was constantly thinking about his relationship with the Radiance. Although it was the two of them who played the leading role when Kevin lured the Radiance into St. Louis and helped them eliminate the Huxley family, it was already long in the past. As the saying goes, the big company deceives the customers, and the big customer deceives the company. The Radiance had already established a firm foothold in St. Louis and was quickly occupying the market in all areas. Although St. Louis now looked like the territory of the Swinton family and the Thompson family, in reality, it was still under the control of the Radiance, and the Radiance was something Richard would have to handle if he ever wanted to become the leader of the most powerful family in St. Louis again. Herman Thompson's motorcade was attacked in D.C., both the lead car and trailing car bursting into flames. Herman and his grandson Kyle could be seen rushing to safety, and Joseph informed Richard that he had received news that they were both at a safe house. Eager to go to Washington to take care of his father and his son, Richard dissuaded Joseph from doing so, pointing out that if he left now, the Thompson family would be left completely vulnerable back in the Midwest. Joseph came up with the idea of asking the Radiance to come to their rescue. In fact, the Radiance was no longer weaker than either of their families. Although Kevin had a good relationship with both the Swinton and Thompson families, he wasn't in St. Louis right now. So if Joseph wanted to negotiate with Dillon Hill, he knew exactly what he had to do. "No matter what, it's worth a try. I have to give it a try," Joseph said seriously, as he stood up from his chair and quickly left the study, leaving Richard Swinton sitting alone in the room. Richard knew better than to stop Joseph, not just because Joseph's mind was made up, but Richard also knew that dealing with the Radiance was a necessary evil, and he'd just as soon let Joseph do the dirty work. On the second floor of Chicago's Salix Leaf Complex, Lily and Rachel were lying in bed. The thin blanket on top of them faintly revealed their graceful figures. Ever since Dorothy had started trouble and Kevin had left, Lily called Rachel, and Rachel immediately went to the Salix Leaf Complex, where she had stayed with Lily every day since. "Lily, don't think too much about it. President Wright and the others have already said that this matter is important for Kevin to go and deal with," Rachel said as she looked sideways at Lily, who was looking very somber. Rachel could not imagine why Lily was taking so long to see that Kevin wouldn't leave Lily behind if his work was of great importance. Lily's mood these past few days was very low. Rachel really did not know what she was thinking about half the time, and she was increasingly worried and afraid that Lily would do something stupid. Lily looked at Rachel with puffy eyes and said, "Rachel, tell me honestly, what kind of deep animosity does Kevin have with the Williams family? Why did his family do this to him in the first place?" During these past few days, she had been thinking about a lot of things. Why had Kevin been expelled from the family? And why did the Williams family turn a blind eye to him when he married into the Jones family? There were more and more questions in Lily's mind, but as the days went on, there were fewer and fewer answers. And why did the Williams family always seem to target Kevin? Furthermore, Kevin was often away from home. Although a large part of the reason was that she knew that he and Dorothy did not get along, Lily really wanted to know what he was up to when he was so often gone for so long. Try as she might, Lily couldn't stop the questions from piling up in her head. "It's not that I don't want to tell you everything, but I really don't know much about Kevin's past," Rachel said. She also did not really know where to start. "I just heard some rumors. Several years ago, Kevin seemed to have colluded with outsiders to misappropriate the family's funds. It caused the whole family to lose a lot of money, so he was essentially kicked out of the family. But actually, I'm not too sure whether this is true or not. But I also heard something else. Lily, you have to promise me something. You must not ask Kevin anything about this." Rachel moved her body a little to allow herself to lean closer to Lily. Her mouth was almost touching her ear and her voice became a very soft whisper. It was as if she was afraid that the room was bugged, and she was worried about who might be listening in on their conversation. I heard that a while ago, Kevin's grandfather was so angry about what happened that it led to his own death, she said. Hearing Rachel's words, Lily subconsciously tightened her blanket around her shoulders. She had never known about these things, and she refused to believe that Kevin, who looked so honest and trustworthy, could possibly do such a thing. Colluding with outsiders to move the family's funds and angering his own grandfather to death. This was not something that an ordinary person would do. She certainly would not have married a man who was capable of such evil deeds. But Lily, don't worry too much about it, Rachel said as she seemed to have seen through the worry in her heart, and was now afraid that Lily would have a different opinion of Kevin. Rachel quickly began to backtrack, and she hurriedly continued to explain. Actually, these things are just hearsay. Some people are criticizing Kevin because of who he is, but some people are also firmly on his side, just like President Wright and many others. If they thought that there was even a chance that the worst of these accusations were true, I don't think they would continue following him. So Lily, don't let your imagination run wild. You have been married to Kevin for a few years now. You should know very well what kind of person he is and whether he would even be capable of doing those things or not. You should just wait for him to come back. Then you can have an honest conversation about all of this. I'm sure he can explain everything. Of course, Lily knew that Rachel was just trying to explain things on behalf of Kevin, but she did not want to say a single word. Recently, there had been too many things that had happened, making it hard for her to accept anything at face value. She needed a long time to mull things over and to figure out how she would approach Kevin about everything when the time came. In the director's office of the Healing Arts School, Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard lowered their heads and looked at the latest news. For a moment, both of them could not help but frown. The people of the Alliance and the Myriads were apparently going to battle against one another. What they were worried about at the very beginning had finally started to happen. Several organizations had requested to fight under the guise of supporting justice. They wanted to form a bloc to take advantage of the situation given the actions of the Alliance and the Myriads.
Old friend, there are some people who can't make a decision in the end,
Harley Shepard said after sitting indifferently for a long time. Then he slowly put his hand on the table.
Is this normal?
Wayne Ford said. His expression did not change much. He only spoke faintly as if he was narrating a simple matter. He added,
In the past, the whereabouts of the Alliance and the Myriads were hidden. That's why everyone else would behave themselves. It's different now. Apex Island is in a precarious situation, and those families in Washington, D.C. are in a dire situation. Some of them are still holding back. If these powers don't think for themselves, there's no telling what could happen next. And once the dam breaks, it would be almost impossible to go backward in the future.
Harley Shepard didn't refute Wayne Ford's words. In fact, he even agreed with everything he had said from the bottom of his heart. However, suddenly a light seemed to flash in Wayne Ford's eyes, and he said,
However, such a situation is not, without a doubt, an entirely bad thing. The current situation is one that has a tendency to create heroes, is it not? It has been a very long time since a true young hero has appeared in the Foundation.
Wayne knew how to put an idea in Harley's head so that it would cause great excitement. Harley Shepard was stunned when he heard that. Then he quickly reacted. He had a meaningful smile on his face. He looked at Wayne and asked, Are you talking about Kevin? Old friend, do you really think that highly of that kid?
Why not? Why can't it be his time?
Wayne Ford said as he glanced at him and asked in return.
Every era needs someone to stir up the storm and stand at the top of the waves. Just think, how old are we now? This era no longer belongs to us. It's time to pass the torch.
Harley Shepard smiled bitterly when he heard this. He thought back to the days when he was still a hot-blooded young man who was fearless and brave enough to fight without end. However, as time had passed, the sharp edges of their bodies had long since been smoothed out. In their current positions, there were already so many things that they had to think about, but arguably none of them could possibly be bigger than this. Even Harley knew that it was time for him to admit a new generation had to take the reins, and in Kevin, he and Wayne saw the perfect leader for that generation. Rachel led Lily into a discussion of the rumors swirling around Kevin, that his pact with outsiders ruined his family's fortune and led to his grandfather's death. But Rachel assured doubtful Lily that Kevin was honorable and surely didn't act with ill will toward his family. Meanwhile, Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard saw the looming battle between the Myriads and the Alliance as a way to hand over power to a new generation of warriors led by Kevin. At the same time, it seemed like the things that were transpiring in the ancient tomb were taking place in an entirely different reality from what was happening in the outside world. With the sun hanging low in the sky as it would seemingly never set, Dalton Steele carried the unconscious Kevin on his back and followed Jake Morris out of the cave. The moment the box had disappeared, so much of the spiritual energy that seemed to be emanating off every wall inside the cave had disappeared in an instant. Jake Morris lifted his head and looked out towards the horizon in the distance. He turned to the others and said,
"So what are you going to do next? Do you want to stay here near the ancient tomb, or do you want to return to Chicago? Or you can follow me back to Washington."
Many places throughout the forest were covered with blood. Thick smoke seemed to be rising in all directions. As they looked around, it was clear that many parts of the forest had been completely destroyed. Some parts of the mountain had even been blown away. Broken limbs were everywhere, and it was even difficult to identify a complete corpse. This was more than enough to demonstrate just how intense the battle between the various major powers had been. The battles for the ancient relic hidden inside the tomb had been long and hard-fought, and it angered Jake to think that Greg had gotten away with the treasure. Jake also had to think about Kevin, his new friend and peer, and that had him offering Kevin's team help in getting him home safely. Troy Evans and the others were tactful and didn't say anything about the horrors they were seeing now that they had left the tomb. They deferred to Dalton, who was carrying Kevin on his back. After thinking for a moment, Dalton faintly sighed and said,
"Forget it. I thank you, Mr. Morris, for your concern. However, Kevin is currently unconscious, and it would be best if we didn't subject him to any long-distance travel for the time being. So I think I should make sure he can recover nearby for the time being and then send him back to Chicago. We will find an opportunity to see you after he recovers."
"Are you sure you don't want to come back with me to Washington? The extent of his injuries is a little unclear, and I can make sure that he receives the absolute best care there. The Morris family has access to all kinds of precious medicinal herbs, and we have the very best medicinal pills that money can buy. I can provide him with any kind of recovery environment," Jake Morris said stubbornly. In his opinion, Kevin had suffered such a serious injury because he wanted so desperately to save him. On some level, it seemed clear that Jake felt guilty, or at least somewhat responsible for Kevin's current condition. Suddenly, Dalton felt that Kevin, whose body was draped over his shoulder with his head near Dalton's back, was subtly trying to tell him something. Dalton shook his head a few times.
"I really don't think it would be for the best, Mr. Morris. We don't know many people in D.C. An unfamiliar environment might hinder his recovery. Moreover, Kevin's wife is still in Chicago. We have been gone so long, and I know that she must be very worried. I think it would be best for both her and Kevin if we let him recover near her."
Jake Morris frowned slightly and thought for a while. He took a deep look at Kevin, who still had his eyes closed. He took a deep breath and nodded slightly.
"All right. I can agree to let you guys go back to Chicago, but after Kevin recovers fully from his injuries, you must come to Washington to find me. I insist that you all come with me when the time comes. I can assure you that I will treat you all very well,"
Jake said. It seemed as though he had originally wanted to say something else, but he didn't say it out loud. He nodded at Dalton, Troy, and the others, and then looked at the rest of the people behind him and quickly headed away from the entrance of the cave. When all of them were gone, Dalton turned around and looked at Kevin.
"We don't need to pretend anymore,"
he said. But before he could even finish his words, Kevin jumped off of Dalton's back and said, "Oh my God, I'm so sore from being on your shoulder all this time."
"Hey, don't say it like it was some kind of burden for you. I was the one who had to carry you all the way out of the cave. I'm the one who's tired here,"
Dalton said as he twisted his shoulder a few times and winced in discomfort. "Ha ha!" Kevin chuckled as he scratched the back of his head and turned to look at the landscape around him. He could not help but exclaim in shock. "Damn, those people are really something. They actually destroyed this place to such an extent. We're fortunate that we didn't go and fight them head on." The corner of Dalton's mouth twitched. How could he not see that Kevin was deliberately changing the topic?
"Mr. Williams, the item is still in my possession. Should I give it to you now, or would you like me to hold on to it for a while longer?"
Troy Evans said with an unpleasant expression on his face. "Let me take a look at it now," Kevin said seriously. He was also very curious about what was inside the box. Not only had it been in the deepest part of the tunnel, but it even emitted such dense, cold energy. Troy reached behind him and pulled it out of his bag. Kevin rubbed his hands together and leaned towards the box. As soon as he touched it, he felt a bone-piercing coldness that made him shiver. "I want to see what this is." Kevin took a deep breath and prepared to slowly open the box. Violet Sweeney, Jordan Black, and the others gathered around him with interest. When Kevin opened a small crack in the box, an even colder gust of air was released.
"What the hell is this?"
Dalton muttered as he rubbed his shoulders, almost unable to bear the bone-piercing coldness. For some reason, Kevin felt that the chill coming from inside the box was very familiar. He seemed to have felt it somewhere before, but he could not put his finger on it. When he opened the box a little more, a dark fog as black as ink began seeping from inside the box. Then everyone felt a strong suction force, as if the box in front of them had a strong gravitational force. It was like a black hole that could devour everything in its vicinity. Kevin used all his strength to close the box again. Cold sweat had soaked through the clothes on his back. Dalton and the others clearly saw how strained Kevin was at the moment. "Mr. Williams, what just happened to you?" Violet asked with concern and confusion.
"Yeah, Kevin, what was that? Do you have any idea?"
Dalton said with a confused look on his face. Kevin swallowed with some difficulty. He finally remembered. Why did he feel that this feeling was familiar? He was almost sure what was in the box. It was exactly the same as what he had encountered in the ancient tomb the last time when they had gone to Sandra Wilson's childhood home. Up until now, Kevin still clearly remembered what Long Eagle had said to him. The world would descend into chaos. "No!" Kevin's lips moved slightly. He tilted his head and became silent again. He did not say the words that were about to come out of his mouth.
"What's wrong with Kevin?"
Dalton muttered as he seemed to have realized something was gravely wrong, but he could not tell exactly what it was. "We need to return to the Healing Arts School immediately," Kevin said as he quickly put the box into his bag and got up to leave the ancient tomb. By the time they set out, it was already nighttime. What's going on? There was still some daylight not too long ago. Why is it suddenly night again? Justin Black said as he looked up at the night sky with some confusion. Troy Evans frowned and seemed to see the problem.
"The gravitational pull of the black box. It could be warping space and time. Or maybe in the ancient tomb we cannot calculate time in a normal way."
Kevin was not interested in finding out exactly what was going on. He was intent on getting back to the Healing Arts School as quickly as possible. He had no interest in ever returning to the ancient tomb ever again. A third trip there would almost surely not end as well as the first two, and might even result in death. Kevin, on Dalton's shoulders, Jake, and the others emerged from the tomb to find a horrible battle that had taken place at its entrance while they were inside. The group, though, was safe, but Jake tried to convince Kevin's team that he should be taken to Jake's home in DC to recover. They convinced Jake to leave without Kevin, who was only faking his injuries. Now, though, Jake saw that the box had powerful energies that needed to be controlled, or otherwise doom could loom for all. After spending a night in Chicago, Kevin and the others returned to Corwin Tower first. After letting Troy and the others get settled back into the penthouse there, Kevin and Dalton went straight to the Healing Arts School to tell Wayne Ford and Harley Shepard about their battles in the ancient tomb, and more important, about the box.
"You guys are back so soon?"
Seeing the two of them, Wayne Ford's right hand, which was holding a coffee mug, stopped in midair. After a bit of hot coffee spilled out of the mug, he finally came back to his senses. "I have a few things I want to discuss with you," Kevin said, getting right to the point as he looked quickly around the office. Although classes at the Healing Arts School had already begun by this time, he did not see anyone else around.
"What is it?"
Wayne looked at Kevin and then started to wipe the table where he had spilled the coffee with his head down. Kevin licked his lips and said, "I wonder if you know anything about the 5 elemental effect."
"The 5 elemental effect? What makes you ask about that? Who did you run into in the ancient tomb? Was it Greg Fantilli or someone from the upper realm?"
Wayne asked in surprise as he suddenly raised his head. Kevin instantly caught on to the key words in Wayne Ford's question. What was the upper realm? He had never heard Wayne or Harley mention the upper realm. Did they do that intentionally? Was the upper realm to be a secret from Kevin?
"You didn't become enemies with them, did you?"
Wayne Ford seemed to be a little worried as he asked. No, of course not." Kevin shook his head and answered straightforwardly.
"Is the family that Greg Fantilli belongs to really that powerful?"
Dalton suddenly interrupted and asked. Wayne Ford took a deep breath and looked at the two of them.
"I thought you would have a while longer before you came into contact with this level," he said.
"Dean Ford, what are you trying to say?" Kevin asked as he leaned forward. Wayne Ford glared at Kevin unhappily.
"Greg Fantilli is a member of a very powerful family in the upper realm. It has been many years since they have shown their faces in the Foundation," he said.
"You still haven't told us what the upper realm is," Kevin said again, still puzzled.
"It's rude to interrupt others while they're speaking. I will slowly explain what you want to know, but you need to shut up and listen first."
Wayne Ford scolded him, clearly in a bad mood. He originally wanted to explain everything in one go, but he was frustrated that he was continuously interrupted by questions from these two. Kevin and Dalton both revealed small smiles. They found a place to sit down and waited for Wayne Ford's full explanation.
"In fact, there are many things that you don't know about. For our purposes, you can consider all of the entities you have come into contact with so far as being part of the middle and the low realms. The Morris family, for example, is a major power in that world. However, there is another realm that only a small amount of people know about, the upper realm. All those who wade into those waters are top experts,"
Wayne Ford said. He suddenly paused before continuing.
"Of course, it is extremely difficult to gain much knowledge about what goes on in those circles."
Kevin slowly touched the tip of his nose and tried his best to digest what Wayne Ford had just said. He only found out today that the upper realm even existed. Not surprisingly, he was even more ignorant than he had thought when he was living his life in Chicago. It was clear to him now what a small place the city actually was. At this moment, Kevin suddenly had an idea. He could not be limited anymore. He needed to know more. Kevin, who had been thinking quietly for a long moment, suddenly had a change in his expression. He looked at Wayne Ford and said seriously, "I have one more thing to ask, Dean Ford. Have you heard of the 10 Directions?"
"The 10 Directions?"
Wayne Ford said, stunned for a moment before he recovered from his shock. His eyes were so wide that they almost popped out. "That's right," Kevin said, nodding and leaning forward even more. The conversation between the two stunned Dalton Steele. He had no idea what the 10 Directions was, but he could tell from Wayne Ford's reaction that it was something important. In the Williams family's mansion in New York City, Thomas Williams had just sent away his 2 guests. When he returned to his bedroom, he saw his wife Laura sitting in front of the mirror. "Did you tell them? When are you going to send an expert over?" Laura, who was removing her makeup, sprayed something on her face, then looked at herself in the mirror as she asked with a smile. It was always best to question her husband about difficult things while giving him her biggest smile.
"It has been discussed. The Alliance will send 10 experts to our family. They will probably arrive in New York City the day after tomorrow,"
Thomas replied as he took off his coat and stretched comfortably.
"We have prepared well this time. We don't need to worry about Kevin playing any tricks."
"Huh. This time we must make sure that Kevin doesn't come back alive," Laura said as her facial expression suddenly became ferocious, and her eyes took on a murderous look. She couldn't smile when thinking about ungrateful Kevin. Since the first time Kevin had gone against her in front of so many people, Laura Williams hated him to the bone. Not to mention the other reason why Laura had never liked Kevin, which was her fear that he would take away everything that the Williams family had. In short, in Laura Williams' heart, Kevin was a potential threat, and she had to eliminate him. Kevin's every move since he was young could only be described as outstanding in the eyes of everyone in the Williams family, especially the talent he had shown in business from a very young age. In addition to his grandfather's love for him, almost no one doubted that he would one day take over as the leader of the entire Williams family at some point in the future. Even if it was a few years ago that Laura Williams had framed him for colluding with outsiders and misappropriating the family's funds, she felt that he was coming to seek revenge at any moment, and so she constantly felt like she had to be looking over her shoulder. However, the reality was that Kevin's decision was right all along. The 20% of shares that he bought had increased at a speed that could only be described as astronomical. So how could Laura be at ease under such circumstances? Although her own son was impressive in his own right, his accomplishments had been completely eclipsed from head to toe by Kevin. Initially, Laura thought that by expelling Kevin from the Williams family, he would never be able to make a comeback. However, never in her wildest dreams had she expected that things would turn out like this. Not only had Kevin returned and risen to the helm of the Williams Company, but he had also brought the organization to new heights. Furthermore, he had also made quite a name for himself in Chicago. Now his achievements in herbalism were even more surprising. All of Laura's best efforts to ruin Kevin's life had backfired. This led Laura Williams to an unprecedented sense of crisis. After all, she had done so many things that had let Kevin down. If she didn't kill him, she knew that she wouldn't be able to live peacefully, because there would always be fear in her heart that the truth would be revealed.
"Don't worry, darling."
Thomas Williams, who was standing behind her, buried his head into her shoulder and said,
"This time the experts sent by the Alliance are all true experts. There is nothing to fear from Kevin. It will not be a problem even if all the powers in New York City are completely wiped out. You should feel free to swallow your fears."
"As long as Kevin is alive, I won't be able to feel at ease," Laura said softly as she shook her head gently.
"Don't worry so much. It's getting late. Let's get some rest,"
Thomas Williams said as he revealed an evil smile on his face. He lifted Laura up from her seat and carried her toward the bed. In the dean's office of the Healing Arts School, Kevin told Wayne Ford everything that had happened in the ancient tomb. Wayne Ford did not interrupt him once, and he listened very seriously and intently.
"How did you know about the box?"
Wayne Ford asked in puzzlement as he squinted his eyes. "Do you believe that I have seen the 10 Directions before?" Kevin hesitated for a moment before answering.
But that's impossible."
Wayne Ford immediately denied Kevin's answer.
"The 10 Directions is the most evil thing in the world. It was shattered so long ago. How could you have seen that thing?"
Kevin's brows knitted tightly together as he answered. You also said that we were going to refine it together. Could it be that the 10 directions disappeared afterward? Moreover, so many years have already passed. Who can guarantee that the 10 directions hasn't recovered yet? He knew that it was difficult to explain the root of the problem with just a few words. The only way was to show it to him. However, Kevin didn't say this out loud to Wayne Ford. In the story he had told, he only said that the box had disappeared in the end. He wasn't ready to tell Wayne and Harley the truth about where the box was, until he was sure that doing so would benefit him. It wasn't that he didn't trust Wayne Ford, although it was true that he didn't know the origin and power of the 10 directions. However, this thing had appeared in both the ancient tomb and in what Long Eagle had told him before. Kevin really didn't dare to take it out and show it to Wayne Ford just yet. What he was thinking now was that he had to go meet the Night King and gain a better understanding of the 10 directions and their power.
What you said is true. No one was able to verify what happened back then,
Wayne Ford said, not refuting Kevin's words this time. Instead, he started to seriously think about the meaning behind them. Dalton sat quietly off to the side. He felt as if he were just a spectator listening to their conversation. It was obvious that he could not interrupt them, so he might as well listen attentively. Kevin and Wayne suddenly became silent. After a few minutes, the door of the office was suddenly pushed open from the outside, and Harley Shepard hurriedly walked in. Seeing Kevin and Dalton in the office, Harley Shepard blurted out in surprise, "You two are back?"
"Hello, sir."
Dalton quickly stood up from his chair and greeted Harley.
"It looks like something has happened to you,"
Wayne Ford said. He knew his old friend very well. He could tell a lot from his facial expression. Harley, who was asked this question, did not bother to respond to his student's greeting. He quickly told them what he knew. "I just received news that the Morris family and the Herbalist Society are under suspicion of colluding with the Pinnacle during the battle. Still, they will never let go of their claim that Kevin has colluded with a member of the Pinnacle. Currently, the Reaper Squad is fighting against the two major powers. Also, Herman Thompson traveled from St. Louis to personally bring them to the capital. Scott Whitney, who is helping the Reaper Squad, is committed to helping Kevin get out of this mess. But not long ago, they were attacked. If it wasn't for the protection of the experts from the Radiants and Herman's many old friends in Washington, D.C., they might have died by now." "What?" Kevin said, his eyes widening. In an instant, he jumped up from his chair as if it was on fire. He actually didn't know anything about what Harley Shepard had just said. "It happened so suddenly, and I just received the news," Harley said. He could not help but look at Kevin deeply. "Herman Thompson is one of the most respected men I know. Ever since he came back to the Midwest, he hasn't been back to Washington even once. It's been several decades since he stepped foot there. I didn't expect him to risk his life for you like this." Kevin didn't hear anything Harley Shepard had just said. The image of Herman Thompson being held captive suddenly appeared in his mind, and he didn't know what to say for a long moment. In the courtyard of the Swinton family's mansion in St. Louis, Dylan Hill, Richard Swinton, and Joseph Thompson were sitting around a stone table. All three of them had very serious expressions on their faces. "This matter must be resolved, Mr. Hill. My father and my son are currently facing a situation where they are surrounded by enemies. I would like to trouble you to send more experts to Washington to protect my family," Joseph said in a serious manner. He added, "As long as the Radiance is willing to help, the Thompson family is willing to pay any price." While Kevin and Dalton were meeting with Wayne Ford at the Healing Arts School, Harley Shepard suddenly arrived and informed them that the Morris family and the Herbalist Society were under suspicion of colluding with the Pinnacle during the battle. He also let them know that Herman Thompson had traveled with the Reaper Squad to Washington, D.C., but that they were attacked, and only the presence of the Radiants was able to save Herman. Herman's safety may be ensured by his son Joseph, who hoped to send the Radiance members to D.C. to rescue him again. Dylan Hill didn't respond immediately to Joseph Thompson's offer to pay the Radiance agents a great amount of money to go to D.C. to rescue Herman and Kyle Thompson from their kidnappers. Instead, he lowered his head and thought about something.
Herman only risked his life for Kevin. I hope you can think about this clearly. Therefore, protecting Herman is in a way a disguised way of protecting Kevin.
Richard Swinton said as his right-hand finger kept tapping on the back of his left hand. He kept thinking about what else he could possibly say to completely convince the person in front of him.
Mr. Thompson, I understand what you two are trying to say. It's just that this is not a trivial matter. Both of you are smart people. You should know how many experts I have arranged for your father. To be honest, I will always remember the kindness of the Swinton family and the Thompson family in my heart. The Radiant shouldn't stand idly by in this matter,
Dylan said. After saying this much, Dylan suddenly stopped and licked his lips. After seeing the change in their expressions, he continued.
However, both of you know that the Radiance's branch in St. Louis has just been established not too long ago. Although we have made good progress in every field, the bottom line is that they still haven't established a firm foothold there. It's really difficult to transfer more manpower, especially at a time like this.
Joseph's and Richard's faces darkened at the same time when they heard Dylan's words. They naturally understood what he meant.
Mr. Hill, what do you mean by this? Don't forget how the Radiant settled down in the St. Louis area in the first place,
Joseph said as his facial expression turned ugly. His words were filled with a sense of bitterness.
Mr. Thompson, surely you must understand the situation we find ourselves in here.
Dylan was also a man who couldn't be taken advantage of or persuaded too easily.
Don't you know that your father was ambushed this time? How many people from the Radiants already died to protect him? Furthermore, it's true that we went to Washington for the sake of Mr. Williams, but you should know that the moment I received the news, I immediately sent all the people from that branch straight to him. Right now, I really don't have anyone else I can use, and we're already stretched thin as it is.
The three of them became silent. The truth was right in front of them, and no one could refute it.
Mr. Hill, is there really no other way?
Richard asked with some embarrassment. In fact, among the three of them, Richard Swinton's situation was undoubtedly the most awkward. Firstly, he had been friends with the Thompson family for many years, and Herman had always been like something of a mentor to him. Secondly, Kevin was like a son to him, and he was also one of the higher-ups of the Radiants. As for the exact level, although he wasn't quite sure yet, there was no doubt in his mind that he had deep ties to the Radiants. Therefore, it was a bit awkward for Richard to speak up for the Radiants, and it was also awkward for him to speak up for the Thompson family. Still, he hoped that his ties to both would put him in a strong position to help the two of them come to a resolution.
There is a way. You should know that we have always been very secretive. Most of the matters within the Radiants will be handled by Spencer and Derek. If you want to transfer more people to help Mr. Thompson, you must get their permission. There is simply no other way at the moment,
Dylan said as he spread his hands and spoke with a helpless tone. Hearing this, Joseph and Richard's faces turned bitter again. They had witnessed the methods of these two men. When the Huxley family was destroyed, it was they and their men who had done it. They couldn't imagine how difficult it would be to convince them of something for which it was not immediately clear how it would benefit them. However, at this moment, a voice suddenly came from just outside the door.
"You don't need to ask for their opinion," the voice said.
The next second, the three of them looked toward the source of the voice. They couldn't help but be surprised. Who else was walking into the courtyard at that very moment but Kevin Williams?
"Mr. Williams!"
Dylan quickly stood up from his chair and called out respectively. Kevin only glanced at Dylan indifferently, then slightly raised his hand to stop him from being overly courteous. He only went straight over to Richard Swinton and Joseph Thompson. "Mr. Swinton, Mr. Thompson," Kevin greeted the two men respectfully. When he learned about this situation from Harley Shepard back at the Healing Arts School, he immediately rushed to St. Louis. In addition, he also gave Spencer a call asking him to prepare 2 teams of 15 men to come to Herman Thompson's aid. The weakest of them was at level 5. This time, he was going to head to Washington, D.C. personally. Secondly, Ever since Kevin found out that the stage he had been operating on was not considered the upper realm, he was in a bad mood. Kevin did not like to think that all of his skills and all of his effort had only led him to be on the second highest level. Despite his nagging desire to live a more peaceful and less stressful life, Kevin was not a person who was willing to stay on the sidelines in the face of injustice. He wanted to do everything in his power to help.
Kevin, when did you come to St. Louis? Where have you been all this time anyway? Why has it been so long since I've received any news about you?
Richard Swinton's face showed a wide and sincere smile as he looked at Kevin. The dark cloud in his heart had completely disappeared. Thank you for your concern, sir. I've had some important matters to attend to recently, but I've been well. I'm sorry for not keeping you more updated on things, Kevin replied apologetically. He could not help but feel warmth in his heart at the sight of Richard. Not all of the people in this world have been heartless to him. There were also some people who were constantly thinking of him and always willing to look out for his well-being.
Mr. Williams, you already know about my father's current situation?
Joseph was so anxious that he did not care about any of the small talk. He got straight to the point as soon as he opened his mouth. Kevin nodded slightly. He turned around and looked at Dylan Hill. Thank you, Dylan. You have done very well this time. Although I did not give you any specific orders, you sent people to Washington to enter the city in time, he said.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. I'm happy to help,
Dylan replied as he relaxed a little. It was good to get praise from a leader like Kevin, whom Dylan respected greatly. When he saw Kevin, his heart was filled with uneasiness. Although he was temporarily managing the Radiance's branch in St. Louis, it didn't mean that he could directly take charge of everything and give orders without Kevin's permission. Especially regarding the matter of Herman Thompson, everyone knew how dangerous it was for him to go to Washington. To put it bluntly, sending people there was no different than sending people to their deaths. And most importantly, those who followed Herman had to be powerful experts. Losing such a group of people would only weaken the Radiance's strength in St. Louis, which Dylan knew was definitely not something that Kevin would want to see happen. Either way, Dylan knew that he was stuck between a rock and a hard place. Fortunately, Kevin seemed to understand the predicament he had found himself in and did not blame him for this matter. Otherwise, Dylan would be extremely anxious about making the wrong call, and the consequences of that could have been disastrous for his own position within the Radiance. Rest assured, Joseph, you don't have to worry about your father anymore. I've already ordered the Radiance to prepare 30 level 5 experts to come to St. Louis. Kevin gently stroked his hand and said calmly,
Come to St. Louis? Why don't they just go straight to Washington, D.C.?
Joseph asked in surprise. He almost didn't even hear the number Kevin had said and only heard that the experts were coming to St. Louis. He didn't understand what Kevin meant by this. How could Kevin not understand that the danger was in D.C., where Joseph's father and son were being held captive? Richard and Joseph were disheartened by Dylan's unwillingness to send additional forces from the Radiance to protect Herman Thompson in Washington, D.C. Suddenly, Kevin arrived in the courtyard of the Swinton family's mansion, having traveled to St. Louis from the Healing Arts School immediately after Harley Shepard informed him of Herman's predicament. Kevin informed the three of them that he had personally ordered 2 teams of 15 level 5 experts, each to come from the Radiance to St. Louis. But Joseph was immediately surprised that Kevin had ordered them to come to St. Louis rather than to Washington, D.C. Richard immediately snapped back to his senses and asked in shock,
Kevin, are you going to Washington?
You don't have to try to stop me. While Herman may be old, he can still fight, and we must do everything we can to fight alongside him. Although his words couldn't be said to be filled with righteous indignation, it made Richard Swinton need to think for a moment. Joseph frowned deeply. He clearly remembered what Herman had said before he left. Kevin was definitely not an ordinary person. To the entire Thompson family, it was clear that Herman would risk his life to protect Kevin under any circumstances. Joseph spoke up, saying,
Mr. Williams, have you really decided? Don't you want to think about it?
My father has already been treated like this after just setting foot in the capital. If it was you, I'm afraid." Joseph did not finish his words, but the meaning was very clear. The Morris family and the Herbalist Society were clearly targeting Kevin with everything they had. If he went to Washington now, wouldn't he just be walking straight into a trap? If he died now, wouldn't all of Herman's actions up to this point be in vain? Wouldn't all of his efforts be in vain? "Joseph, what do you mean by this?" Kevin said as he frowned slightly. He couldn't understand what he meant. "What I mean is that Washington, D.C. is far too dangerous right now. Although your power base is quite strong, your foundation is still here in the Midwest. Once you set foot in Washington, D.C., you won't be able to move an inch. There will be so many powerful enemies surrounding you. So I think it would be best if you only send some people to Washington, D.C. on your behalf to ensure my father's safety. In addition, you can take advantage of this period of time to settle everything here in the Midwest. Try to stabilize the foundation of your power as much as possible while others take care of the situation in Washington. This way, not only will you be able to solve the problem, but you will also be able to maintain a stable foundation and set yourself up for what comes next," Joseph said, carefully analyzing and laying out the situation for Kevin. Richard Swinton stood off to the side and listened attentively to Joseph. Kevin licked his lips and opened his mouth a few times, but he did not say what he was thinking in his heart. On the way here, Kevin had imagined more than once what he would say when he saw Joseph. The very worst result would be that he would ask Kevin to go to the capital immediately. Therefore, in order to calm Joseph's fears, Kevin revealed what he was planning the moment he appeared. However, he had never thought that Joseph would be so considerate of his own well-being. He even explained in detail the danger awaiting him in Washington, D.C., and urged him not to go. "Do you really think that way?" Kevin asked himself while he took a moment to think about Joseph's tactics. "Of course, Kevin. Washington, D.C. is a pool so deep that it can swallow a mountain without making any ripples. You are still so young. There is no need for you to take this kind of risk. There is a smarter course of action that will still yield the best-case scenario." Joseph tried his best to persuade Kevin. He was afraid that Kevin would suddenly become hot-headed and lead his men to Washington, D.C. regardless. "But Herman is your father. Don't you think we need to throw caution to the wind and do everything we possibly can to ensure his safety?" Kevin asked helplessly. He knew Joseph wouldn't say it out loud, so he knew he had no choice but to point out the true stakes of what they were facing. "I know, Kevin. He is my father and I would do anything for him. But the reason why my father went to Washington, D.C. was all for you. I know that he wouldn't want this. If I can't comply with what I know would be his best wishes, that would be the most dishonorable thing of all. I have to do what I know he would want me to do, even if it may not be what I want." Joseph's tone was very firm, almost as if he was slapping his chest in reply. It wasn't just Kevin who was taken aback by Joseph's speech. Even Richard Swinton and Dylan Hill were completely dumbfounded. What Joseph said was something that they had never even thought of. "Joseph, I understand what you're saying, but are you sure this is wise?" Dylan said as he swallowed uncomfortably. Even now, his brain was still buzzing. "That's right, Joseph. No one here is an outsider. We all understand how you feel, but we also need to think rationally. We can't let our emotions get the best of us." Richard Swinton nudged Joseph's shoulder, not knowing how to comfort him. No. You all misunderstand me." Joseph waved his arm a few times and said, "My mind is very clear right now. I know without a doubt that this is the right course of action. I am indeed analyzing the current situation rationally. Kevin, you must not misunderstand that fact." Kevin was speechless for a long time before he came back to his senses. He touched the tip of his nose and didn't know what to say to describe his current feelings. "Then let's do as Mr. Thompson says. This should be his call," Kevin said carefully, still not entirely convinced in his heart, but afraid that going against Joseph's wishes would lead him to do something reckless. Kevin was relieved to see that Joseph reacted positively to his decision. Joseph seemed to take a deep breath and said, "It's good that you can think this way, Kevin. Your top priority now needs to be to stabilize everything here in the Midwest. If you can accomplish that, it won't be too late to slowly reposition and turn your sights back toward Washington." Richard Swinton narrowed his eyes. There was a strange look on his face. He stared at Joseph as if he had thousands of things that he wanted to say but couldn't bring himself to say out loud. "Since you've been so generous, I don't have any need to worry about my father in Washington, D.C. anymore. I know that we are doing everything we can now. I will leave everything to you, Kevin," Joseph said as he took a step toward Kevin. After saying those words with gratitude and tears in his eyes, he turned around and left the mansion of the Swinton family with a big smile on his face. As expected of someone of the Thompson family, the direction of his thoughts is really quite unpredictable, Kevin said softly. Up until now, Kevin had yet to fully react. He couldn't figure out what Joseph was thinking before, but now he understood.
"It's not surprising that he is not someone you can easily see through,"
Richard Swinton said as he looked in the direction of the gate where Joseph had just left. Then he took a deep breath and added seriously,
"Kevin, don't underestimate Joseph. He can do what he has done today, and the reason why he is able to maintain his current status and reputation is not because of his father's protection."
Kevin was slightly surprised when he heard this. He couldn't help but recall the first time he had met Herman and Joseph. Joseph's every action was indeed not something that an ordinary person would do.
"Kevin, why didn't you tell me in advance that you were coming to St. Louis? You should have given me more time to prepare for your visit, so I could ensure you would be comfortable when you arrived,"
Richard Swinton said as he turned to look at Kevin in front of him. He didn't conceal the love and admiration in his eyes. He quickly recalled the words Alan Williams had said about him before. "We should all be so lucky to have a son like Kevin." Richard found it so heartwarming that, at such a young age, Kevin had already made such a name for himself. Just how many people of his generation could make the Morris family, the Herbalist Society, and the Reaper Squad pay attention to him at the same time?